The Grand Assembly Hall of Station Arin was the largest room ever built by any living species. It hung in the dark of space, circling a dead star, and inside it sat the representatives of 312 civilizations. Thousands of alien faces filled the curved rows of seats, their skin in every color, their eyes in every shape. Some breathed air, some breathed liquid, some did not breathe at all. But today, every single one of them was watching the same woman. Ha-Unji stood at the central podium. She was not tall. She was not loud. She wore a simple dark suit, with Earth's blue and green pin on her chest. Behind her, a single holographic screen showed Earth's flag. She had been speaking for nearly 20 minutes, and her voice had not shaken once. Earth has been a provisional member of this union for 40 years, she said. In that time, we have contributed to 163 joint missions. We have opened our medical research to every species that asked. We have sent our engineers to build on worlds we will never live on. We have buried our soldiers on planets whose names we cannot even pronounce. She paused. We did all of this not because we were asked, but because we believed in what this union could be. The hall was quiet, not the respectful kind of quiet, the uncomfortable kind. From the upper rows, Delegate Fenru rose to speak. He was tall and thin, with pale blue skin and 4 arms that he folded behind his back, like a professor about to correct a student. He represented the Talith Dominion, one of the oldest species in the Union, and he had spent the last 2 years building the case against Earth. The human ambassador speaks of contribution, Fenris said, his voice calm and sharp. But contribution does not erase concern. Humanity has been part of this union for only 40 years. In that time, they have expanded faster than any species in recorded history. They have refused to surrender military command to the Union Joint Forces. They have fought wars among themselves, wars within living memory. He let that word hang in the air. And they have developed the Fold Lance system, a weapon so advanced that no other civilization has been able to replicate it. Not one. A murmur moved through the hall. Fenru continued. We are not here because humanity is evil. We are here because humanity is unpredictable. And in a galaxy that has known peace for 6,000 years, unpredictable is dangerous. Unji listened without expression. When it was her turn to respond, she did not raise her voice. She simply pulled up a data file and let it speak for itself. 14 emergency interventions where human ships had arrived first. 9 medical breakthroughs shared freely. 2 entire species saved from extinction-level plagues by human doctors who had volunteered without being asked. She listed every one of them, not with pride, but with the patience of someone reading a receipt. We have never used the Fold Lance against any member of this union, she said. We have never threatened to. We developed it because the galaxy is not as safe as this chamber pretends it is, and someone needed to be ready for what lives beyond the edge of known space. She looked directly at Fenru. You are afraid of us. I understand. But fear is not a reason to punish someone who has done nothing but help you. The hall was silent again, but this time it was the kind of silence that comes before a decision has already been made. Grand Speaker Olivan, a massive creature with a domed head and 6 eyes that glowed faintly gold, called for the vote. His voice was deep and slow, like stone grinding against stone. The motion before this body is the expulsion of Earth from the Galactic Union. All treaties will be voided. All trade will be suspended. All embassies will be closed. Humanity will withdraw beyond the boundary line within 60 standard days. He paused. Cast your votes. The numbers appeared on the central screen, one by one. They climbed fast. 218 in favor, 94 against. Earth was out. The hall erupted into noise. Some delegates cheered. Some looked away. A few species near the back sat completely still, their faces unreadable. Yoonji watched the numbers settle on the screen and did not move. She did not argue. She did not cry. She did not slam her hand on the podium or make a dramatic speech about betrayal. She simply said, acknowledged, we will comply. The noise began to settle, delegates already turning to their aides, ready to move on to the next agenda item. But Eunji did not step away from the podium. However, she said, and her voice was just loud enough to cut through every conversation in the room, you will hear our terms first. Grand Speaker Olivan blinked all 6 of his eyes. Terms? He repeated. Terms, Eunji said, for an orderly withdrawal. You have given us 60 days to leave. We intend to use them. But you should understand clearly what our departure will involve. Olivan hesitated. He looked around the hall. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. But the rules were clear. Any departing member had the right to outline conditions. He nodded slowly. You may proceed. Eunji did not proceed. Instead, she touched the small communicator on her wrist and opened a channel. Her voice was calm and steady as she spoke into it. Captain Yoon. They voted yes. Begin Protocol Dandelion. Somewhere far above them, orbiting just outside the station, the ESS Horizon received the signal. On its bridge, Captain Yoon Taeho, a broad-shouldered man with tired eyes and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from wood, heard the words and nodded once. He turned to his crew. Send it. Lieutenant Kwon Do-hun pressed a single key. At that exact moment, every delegate in the Grand Assembly Hall felt their personal device vibrate. Every single one. 312 species, thousands of individual representatives, all at the same time. They looked down. On their screens was a file. It was enormous, and its title was simple. What Earth has been doing for you. Eunji looked out at the sea of alien faces, all staring at their devices, and for the first time since the vote, she allowed herself the smallest, coldest smile. I suggest you read it carefully, she said. The Grand Assembly Hall had never been this loud. Not in 6,000 years of recorded sessions. Delegates were shouting at each other, shouting at their aides, shouting at their screens. Some were scrolling through the file Earth had sent, their faces changing from confusion to disbelief to something that looked very much like fear. 12,000 light-years away, in a secure underground facility beneath the coastal city of Busan, Dr. Park So-mi sat in a room filled with screens and watched it all happen. She was a small woman with short hair and glasses she did not actually need, but wore anyway because they made people underestimate her. She had been preparing for this moment for 6 years. Every data point, every record, every contract. She had organized them all into one massive, undeniable document. They are reading it now, said one of her analysts, a young man watching the live feed from Station Orin. Good, So-mi said. It was cold. She did not care. On Station Orin, Ha Eunji still stood at the podium, waiting. She had not moved. She did not need to explain what was in the file. The file explained itself. But she watched their faces as they read, and she felt a heaviness in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. The file was not a threat. It was a receipt. 40 years of receipts. It showed that human engineers had designed and currently maintained the navigational framework for 60% of all Union trade routes. Without those navigation codes, ships could still fly, but they would fly blind, relying on outdated star charts that had not been updated in decades. It showed that human construction teams had built the atmospheric stabilizers on 11 colony worlds, planets where the air was not naturally breathable, where millions of aliens lived inside bubbles of Earth-made technology. Those stabilizers needed human maintenance every 14 months. Without it, they would begin to fail within 18 months. Not might fail, would fail. It showed that human doctors had developed the Ven 4 cure, the only known treatment for a disease that could kill 23 different species. The cure existed, it worked, but Earth had never shared the formula. They had only sent their own medical teams to administer it, for free, to anyone who needed it. If those teams left, the plague would return, and no one else knew how to stop it. And then there was the Fold Lance Network. Every delegate in the hall knew about the Fold Lance as a weapon. It was the thing they feared most about humanity, a system that could punch through space itself and deliver destruction across impossible distances. But what almost none of them had realized was that the same technology powered the Union's entire long-range communication system. Human engineers had quietly woven the Fold Lance network into the Union's communication grid 26 years ago, improving its speed by a factor of 800. Without it, real-time communication across the galaxy would simply stop. Messages that currently took seconds would take months. The chamber was still noisy, but the noise had changed. It was no longer the sound of victory. It was the sound of people realizing they had made a terrible mistake. Delegate Fenru was on his feet again. "This is extortion," he said, his forearms shaking with anger. "This is exactly the kind of behavior we voted to remove from this union. Humanity is threatening us with collapse if we do not take them back." Yunji looked at him. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "We are not threatening anyone," she said. "We are leaving, as you asked. But when we leave, we take what belongs to us. That is not extortion, delegate. That is property law. Your property law, in fact." Section 41 of the Union Charter states that any expelled member retains full ownership of all proprietary technology, intellectual property, and infrastructure contributions. She tilted her head slightly. "Did you not read your own charter before you voted to use it against us?" Fenru opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at Grand Speaker Olivan, who was reading the file on his own screen with all 6 eyes moving in different directions, processing the data faster than any human could. Yunji continued. She listed Earth's terms clearly, the way a teacher might explain something to a student who was not paying attention. First, all human-designed infrastructure across Union space would be deactivated and recalled. Every stabilizer, every navigation relay, every water purification system, every power grid that human hands had built. Second, all medical programs operated by human teams would stop immediately. No more Ven 4 treatments. No more emergency response ships. No more free clinics on border worlds. Third, all navigational data that Earth had seeded into Union systems would be wiped. This was not a hack or an attack. It was written into the original licensing agreement that every species had signed when they accepted the data. A licensing agreement that apparently no one had ever bothered to read. Fourth, the Fold Lance communication relay would go dark. Not destroyed, not weaponized, simply turned off. And fifth, Earth would leave peacefully. They would not fight, they would not argue, they would cross the boundary line, and they would not come back. Not unless every single member of the Union, all 312 species, voted unanimously to invite them back. Not a majority, not almost all, every single one. "Those are our terms," Yunji said. "They are not negotiable." The silence that followed was the heaviest silence the Grand Assembly had ever known. Grand Speaker Olivan stared at her for a long time. Then he said, in his slow, grinding voice, "You would let worlds suffer." Yunji's expression did not change, but something in her eyes shifted, something tired and sad, and very, very old for a woman so young. "No," she said quietly, "you would. You voted to send away the people who were keeping those worlds alive. We begged you not to. You did it anyway." She straightened her back. We will not apologize for being necessary, and we will not stay where we are not wanted. She stepped back from the podium. Olivan called for an emergency recess. Delegates flooded out of the hall, some running, some shouting into communicators, some simply standing in the corridors, looking lost. High above the station, aboard the ESS Horizon, Captain Yoon Tae-ho watched through the long-range cameras as the station's docking bays filled with panicked alien ships trying to send emergency messages home. Lieutenant Kwon Do-hoon stood beside him, his young face tight with something between pride and sorrow. They really did not know, Do-hoon said quietly. Tae-ho shook his head. They never do. They always think the quiet ones have nothing to say. He turned from the screen. Begin the withdrawal timeline. 60 days. Not 1 day more, not 1 day less. Do-hoon nodded. Yes, Captain. On the first day after the vote, nothing happened. The galaxy held its breath and waited for humanity to change its mind, to send a message saying it was all a bluff, that they would not really leave. But no message came. On the second day, the first human engineers began packing their tools on a water processing station above a desert world called Thuren. They had been there for 19 years. They had turned a dying planet into a home for 2 million people. They packed quietly. They shook hands with their alien coworkers. Some of them cried. Then they boarded their shuttles and left. By the end of the first week, it was happening everywhere. Admiral Bae Jin-ho ran the withdrawal from the bridge of the ESS Compass, the largest logistics ship in Earth's fleet. He was a tall man, with gray at his temples, and hands that were always steady, even when the rest of him was not. His job was simple and enormous. Bring every human home. Every engineer, every doctor, every teacher, every translator, every pilot, every cook who had been working on an alien world for the last 4 decades. Thousands of people, hundreds of worlds, 60 days. He did not sleep much. The reports came in every hour. On a moon called Perith, human teachers said goodbye to classrooms full of alien children who did not understand why their teachers were leaving. On a station near the galactic core, human pilots handed over navigation duties to alien crews who looked at the star charts and realized they did not know how to read half of them. On a frozen colony at the edge of Union space, a human medical team administered the last round of Ven 4 treatments, labeled every piece of equipment in the local language, and left behind a note that said, "We are sorry. We wish we could stay." No one was angry. That was the thing that surprised the galaxy the most. The humans were not angry. They were sad. They were tired. But they packed their bags, and they left with dignity. And somehow that was worse than any weapon. On the Taelith homeworld, Delegate Fenru received a report from his military advisors. The orbital defense grid, the ring of satellites that protected the entire planet from attack, had been designed by a human defense company 22 years ago. It ran on proprietary human encryption. Without Earth's maintenance codes, the grid would begin to shut down in 30 days. After that, the Taelith homeworld would be unprotected for the first time in living memory. Fenru read the report 3 times. Then he threw it across his office. "Find someone who can fix it," he ordered. His advisors looked at each other. "We have tried," one of them said carefully. "The encryption is beyond anything our engineers have seen. We would need years to reverse it." "We do not have years," Fenru hissed. 3 species broke ranks on day 12, the Morvathi, the Pelyun, and a small civilization called the Adesi, all sent private messages to Earth, requesting independent treaties. They wanted to keep their human engineers. They wanted to keep their medical teams. They were willing to leave the Union if necessary. The Union Council found out within hours and declared the communications illegal. Any species that signed a separate treaty with Earth would be expelled. Earth's response was short and polite. Dr. Park So-mi drafted it herself from the facility in Busan. We appreciate the offer. However, Earth's terms remain unchanged. We deal with the Union as a whole, or we deal with no one. This was the standard the Union set for us. We are simply following it. So-mi put down her pen and stared at the wall. She had spent 6 years building Protocol Dandelion. 6 years of tracking every bolt, every line of code, every medical supply that Earth had placed in alien hands. She had done it because she knew this day would come. Not because she wanted it to, but because she had studied history, and history had taught her that the ones who give the most are always the first to be thrown away. On day 22, the first communication blackout hit. A cluster of 40 star systems in the outer spiral lost their connection to the rest of the galaxy. One moment they were linked to the Union's communication network. The next, silence. The Fold Lance relay in that sector had been switched off according to the withdrawal schedule. It was not an attack. It was not sabotage. It was simply a piece of human technology being turned off by the humans who owned it. The 40 systems did not panic immediately. They had local communication. They could still talk to each other, but they could not talk to anyone else. And for species that had enjoyed instant communication across the galaxy for decades, the silence was terrifying. Ha Eunji was still on Station Arin. Protocol required the ambassador to remain until the final day. She spent her evenings in the station's archives, a vast and beautiful library that held the records of 10,000 years of galactic civilization. The archivist, a quiet creature named Pommel, with soft gray fur and large dark eyes, often sat with her. I have been reading the record of your 40 years, Pommel said one evening, his voice gentle and sad. I must confess something to you. I voted against the banishment, but I did not speak against it publicly. I was afraid of being seen as sympathetic to a species the Council had decided to reject. He looked down at his small hands. I am ashamed of that. Eunji looked at him for a long time. You are not the only one who stayed quiet. 94 species voted with us. But how many more wanted to and did not because they were afraid? Pommel did not answer. He did not need to. We spent 40 years trying to belong, Eunji said, and for the first time her voice was not diplomatic. It was just tired. We learned your languages. We ate your food. We adapted to your customs. We've sent our children to your schools and our soldiers to your wars. And when the vote came, 218 civilizations decided that we were too strange, too fast, too different. She closed her eyes. We will not beg to be tolerated, Pommel, not ever. By day 30, the Union economy had dropped by 12%. Trade ships were getting lost. Medical shortages were spreading. 2 species on a contested border had moved warships into position because their early warning satellites, built by humans, had gone dark, and neither side could tell if the other was preparing an attack. Park So-mi read the reports in Busan and felt something heavy settle in her stomach. She had planned for all of this. She had predicted the timeline almost perfectly. But seeing it happen was different from planning it. Her assistant asked her if she felt satisfied. So-mi shook her head. No, she said quietly. I feel necessary, and I hate it. She turned back to her screens. Send the Day 30 update to Captain Yoon. Tell him we are on schedule. On the bridge of the ESS Horizon, Taeho received the message and read it once. Then he looked out at the stars, the vast, beautiful, ungrateful stars, and said nothing at all. By day 45, the galaxy looked like a body that had lost too much blood. It was still alive, still moving, but it was pale and slow and stumbling in ways it had never stumbled before. The communication blackouts had spread to over 100 systems. Trade had slowed to a crawl in entire sectors. On 11 colony worlds, Atmospheric stabilizers began showing warning lights that no local engineer knew how to fix. The air was still breathable. For now. Earth had withdrawn from 80% of Union space. The remaining human teams were on the last worlds, carefully disassembling the final pieces of equipment, labeling everything, leaving behind instruction manuals that were thousands of pages long and written in 7 languages. They did everything by the book. They did not cut corners. They did not leave traps or hidden problems. They simply took what was theirs and made sure nothing broke violently on the way out. That was the part that made the galaxy angry. Not the leaving. The kindness of the leaving. On day 47, a Morvathi trade convoy of 600 ships entered a navigation corridor in the mid-rim. It was a route they had used 10,000 times. But the human navigation data had been wiped from their systems 3 days earlier, and the backup charts were outdated by 40 years. The convoy flew into a gravity pocket that the old charts did not show. The ships did not crash. Gravity pockets do not work that way. But they were pulled off course and left drifting in a dead corridor, with no landmarks, no communication relays, and fuel reserves that would last 8 days. The Morvathi had voted to banish Earth. The distress signal went out on every frequency. It was weak. Without the Fold Lance relay, it traveled at the speed of old radio, which meant it would take months to reach Union space. But by luck, or by fate, the signal was picked up by the ESS Compass, Admiral Bei Jinho's logistics ship, which was passing through a nearby sector on its way to collect the last human team from a mining colony. Jinho read the distress call on his bridge. 600 ships, 12,000 crew, 8 days of fuel. He was under no obligation to help. The Morvathi were not allies. They were not even neutral. They had voted to throw his species out of the galaxy. His first officer, a sharp woman named Onari, looked at him and waited. She did not ask the question. She did not need to. Jinho rubbed his face with both hands. Then he said, "Set a course. Best speed." Nari hesitated. "Admiral, respectfully, they voted against us." "I know what they did," Jinho said. "And I know what we do. We do not let people die to prove a point. That is not who we are. That has never been who we are." He stood up. "Set a course. Now." The compass arrived at the convoy's position in 14 hours. Jinho's navigation team calculated a safe route out of the gravity pocket, transmitted it to all 600 ships, and guided the entire convoy to the nearest stable system. The operation took 31 hours. Jinho's crew did not sleep. When it was over, the Morvathi fleet commander sent a message to Jinho. It was short. "Why did you help us?" Jinho's response was shorter. "Because you needed help." He did not wait for a reply. The compass turned and left without ceremony, without asking for thanks, without even slowing down. The story spread across the galaxy within days. Even without the Fold Lance relay, news like this found a way to travel. The humans had saved a fleet of the people who had voted to banish them. They had done it without hesitation, without conditions, and without asking for anything in return. The Morvathi delegate stood before the Union Council and publicly reversed his vote. His voice shook as he spoke. "I was wrong," he said. "We were wrong. Not because they are powerful, because they are good. And we threw them away." 7 more species reversed their votes in the following days. Then 12 more. The numbers shifted, slowly at first, then faster, like a wall cracking under pressure. But Delegate Fenru held firm. His orbital defense grid was dead now. Dark metals circling a defenseless world. And his own people were beginning to protest in the streets. But he stood before the council and called the Morvathi rescue a calculated manipulation designed to make humanity look noble. No one clapped when he finished speaking. On Station Arin, Ha Unji spent her last evenings with Archivist Pommel in the Great Library. The station felt emptier now. Many delegations had sent their staff home to deal with local crises. The corridors that had once been crowded with 1,000 species were quiet and echoing. Pommel had been working on something in secret, a new chapter for the Union's historical record. He showed it to Unji one night, a massive document that cataloged everything Earth had contributed to the galaxy, not just the technology and the infrastructure, but the smaller things. The human teacher who had spent 20 years on an ice world teaching alien children to read. The human pilot who had flown into a radiation storm to rescue a ship full of refugees from a species that did not even have a name for humans. The human doctor who had died on a plague world trying to save patients who were not her species, not her people, not her responsibility. In 10,000 years of Union records, Pommel said quietly, no species has ever been voted out. And no species has ever left such a wound by simply leaving. Unji read the document in silence. When she finished, her eyes were bright, but she did not cry. She had made a promise to herself long ago that she would not cry in front of anyone on this station. On day 58, the Union held an emergency vote to reverse the banishment. The result was 308 in favor, 4 against. Fenrir's faction still held 4 species out of 312. The result was sent to Unji immediately. She read it, and for a moment something like hope crossed her face. Then she remembered the terms. She sent a response to Grand Speaker Olivon within the hour. Earth appreciates the gesture. However, our terms were clear from the beginning. The invitation must be unanimous. 312 out of 312. Until that condition is met, Earth's position remains unchanged. Olivon read the message and closed all 6 of his eyes. On day 60, the last human ship prepared to cross the boundary line. The ESS Horizon led a convoy of 43 vessels, transports, medical ships, engineering frigates, and 1 small shuttle carrying Ha-Unji, who had finally left Station Orin, with nothing but a bag of personal items and Pommel's historical document saved on a small data chip in her pocket. Captain Yun Taeho stood on the bridge and watched the boundary line appear on the navigation display. It was not a physical thing. It was just a line on a map, a border drawn by politicians. But today, it meant everything. Lieutenant Kwon Do-hun stood beside him. All ships report ready, Captain, he said. His voice was steady, but his hands were not. Taeho nodded. Take us across. The horizon moved forward. One by one, the convoy followed. They crossed the line in silence. No speeches, no flags, no dramatic last words broadcast across the galaxy. Just 43 ships flying quietly into the dark. When the last ship crossed, Taeho looked back at the stars behind them. The hundreds of billions of stars that made up Union space. The space that had been their home for 40 years. The space that had just told them to leave. We will leave the porch light on, he said quietly, but they have to walk to the door themselves. The convoy flew on. Behind them, the galaxy went dark. 1 year passed. The galaxy survived, but it did not thrive. It limped forward like an animal that had lost a leg and was still trying to pretend it could run. Trade across Union space had dropped by 40%. Routes that once carried millions of cargo ships per cycle now carried a fraction of that, because the navigation systems were unreliable, and pilots were afraid of flying into gravity pockets or dead zones that the old charts did not show. 3 border conflicts had erupted in sectors where the early warning systems had gone dark. 2 of them were small, skirmishes that burned out in weeks. The third was not. 2 species that had been rivals for centuries finally went to war, a war that the Union's diplomatic corps could not stop because their communications were too slow to reach the conflict zone in time. 14,000 people died before a ceasefire was reached. It was the first major war in Union space in 600 years. On 2 worlds, the Ven 4 plague returned. Without human medical teams, there was no treatment. The infected were quarantined. Some recovered on their own. Many did not. The death toll was not enormous, but it was growing, and everyone knew that without the cure, it would keep growing. The 11 colony worlds with human-built atmospheric stabilizers held on longer than Dr. Park Somi had predicted. 14 months, she had estimated. The alien engineers on those worlds managed to stretch it to 16 through desperate improvisation and around-the-clock maintenance. But on the 17th month, the first stabilizer on a world called Duven began to fail. The air in the eastern hemisphere became thin. Not deadly, not yet. But the 2 million people who lived there could feel it every time they took a breath. A slight tightness, a slight weakness, a reminder that the air they breathed was borrowed, and the people who had built the machine that made it were gone. On Earth, life had gone on. Humanity had turned inward, not in defeat, but in focus. They expanded their own colonies beyond the boundary line, building new stations and new settlements in the unclaimed space that stretched endlessly in every direction. They improved their own worlds. They invested in their own research. They did not sulk. They did not plot revenge. They simply lived. But they watched. Dr. Park Somi had been promoted. She was now Secretary of Galactic Readiness, a title she had invented for a position that had not existed before. Her job was simple: prepare for the day the galaxy came calling again. Because she knew it would. She had studied history, and history was clear on this point. The people who throw you out always come back eventually, when they realize they cannot manage without you. She had spent the year building a re-entry plan, not a plan to crawl back as a provisional member, the way Earth had been before. A plan to return as a full sovereign partner, with equal standing, veto rights in the Council, intellectual property protections written into Union law, and mutual defense obligations that went both ways. If the galaxy wanted Earth back, they would get all of Earth. Every part of it. The messy parts, the loud parts, the parts that made them uncomfortable. On the Tawith homeworld, Delegate Fenru's story had ended quietly. His colony's atmospheric stabilizer had been the third to show warning signs. The air had not failed. His engineers had managed to keep it running through methods that were technically illegal under the planet's own safety laws. His people turned on him. Not violently. They simply stopped listening. His government removed him from his position in a closed hearing that lasted less than an hour. He was last seen leaving the Capitol building alone, carrying a single bag, with no one waiting for him outside. Grand Speaker Olivand had aged visibly in 1 year. His golden eyes, once bright and commanding, were dimmer now. He moved more slowly. He spoke more carefully. He had spent the year carrying a weight that no other Grand Speaker had ever carried. The knowledge that he had presided over the greatest mistake the Union had ever made. He decided to fix it himself. Over the course of 3 months, Olivand traveled to every single member world, all 312. He did not send messages. He did not hold conferences. He went in person, on a small ship with a small staff, and he sat down with every government, every council, every leader, and he said the same thing. We made a mistake, a profound one. Not a political mistake, a moral one. We had a partner who gave us everything, and we punished them for being different. I am asking you to correct that, not because we need them, although we do, but because they deserved better from us, and we owe it to ourselves to be the kind of civilization that admits when it was wrong. It took 3 months. Some species agreed immediately. Some argued for weeks. The 4 species who had held out before, Fenru's allies, were the hardest. But Fenru was gone now, and without his voice driving the fear itself began to fade. One by one, they agreed. On a quiet morning on Station Arin, the vote was called. 312 species, 312 votes. Every eye in the chamber watched. 312 in favor, 0 against. Unanimous. The chamber did not erupt in cheers. There was applause, yes, but it was the somber kind, the sound of people acknowledging something important and painful and necessary. Olivan stood at the podium and read the message that would be sent across the boundary line. The Galactic Union, by unanimous consent, extends to Earth a full invitation of partnership. We do not ask you to return. We ask you to let us try again. The message was transmitted through the last functioning relay on the boundary line. It reached Earth in 4 hours. Ha Eunji, now retired, was living in a small house on the coast of Korea. She had a garden and a cat and a shelf full of books in 12 languages. She had not spoken publicly since the day she left Station Orin, but she was watching the news when the message arrived. And when she read the words on her screen, it was the first real smile in over a year, and it changed her entire face. Made her look like the young woman she had been before the galaxy had asked her to carry so much weight. She picked up her communicator and called Somi. Did you see it? Somi's voice was calm, but Eunji could hear the emotion underneath. I saw it. The re-entry plan is ready. It has been ready for months. Good, Eunji said. She looked out at the ocean. Tell Captain Yoon to bring them home. The ESS Horizon led the convoy back across the boundary line 3 days later. Captain Yoon Taeho stood on the bridge in a clean uniform, his back straight, his face unreadable. Lieutenant Kwon Do-hoon was beside him, as always, monitoring the navigation display. Boundary line in 30 seconds, Captain, Do-hoon said. Taeho nodded. All ships, standard formation, no weapons powered, navigation lights on full, and on the other side, they were met by a fleet. Not warships, not a blockade, an escort. Hundreds of ships from dozens of species, arranged in 2 long lines that stretched out into the stars like an honor guard. Every species was represented, every single one. Their lights were on, their weapons cold, their communication channels open, and broadcasting the same message in every language the galaxy had ever known. Welcome back. Do-hoon stared at the view screen. His eyes were wide and his throat was tight, and he whispered, They actually did it. Taeho looked at the fleet, at the lights, at the impossible, beautiful display of 312 civilizations, saying, in the only way they knew how, that they were sorry. They did, he said quietly. Now the real work begins. The Horizon docked at Station Orin 2 hours later. Archivist Pommel was waiting at the airlock. He looked older, and his gray fur was thinner, but his dark eyes were bright with something that Eunji would have recognized immediately as hope. The airlock opened. Captain Yoon Taeho stepped onto the station. Behind him came Do-hoon, and behind Do-hoon came a long line of human diplomats, engineers, doctors, and soldiers, the first wave of Earth's return. They walked with their heads up and their hands open and their faces calm. The gathered delegates watched in silence. Hundreds of alien faces, hundreds of alien eyes, all watching the humans walk back into the place that had thrown them out 1 year ago. Taeho stopped in the center of the hall. He looked around at the faces, the ones who had voted against Earth, the ones who had voted for them, the ones who had stayed silent when silence was the worst choice of all. He did not look angry. He did not look triumphant. He looked like a man who had walked a very long road and was ready, finally, to set down his bag. He spoke simply, the way humans always did when they meant every word. Humanity is here, not because you called, but because you finally listened. The hall was silent for one long moment. Then from somewhere in the upper rows, a single delegate began to clap. Then another. Then 100. Then 1,000. The sound filled the grand assembly hall of Station Orin, rising and rising until it shook the walls, until it echoed out through the corridors and the docking bays and the vast empty spaces of the station. out into the dark, where the stars were shining, where they had always been shining, waiting for someone to come home.